Ivy had learned to make herself small, small enough to fit in doorways, small enough to press against walls, small enough that when people walked past, they didn't have to acknowledge she existed. She was a street rat, that's what they called her. The merchants, the guards, the fine ladies and lords who wrinkled their noses when they caught sight of her. Street rat. Gutter trash. Nothing. She had been nothing for as long as she could remember. Her parents had died when she was 6. Fever, the healers said. Though they hadn't tried very hard to save them. No one tried hard for people like her family. After that, she'd had nowhere to go. No relatives, no money, no one who cared whether she lived or died. So she'd survived, begged for scraps, slept in alleyways, learned which merchants threw out bread at the end of the day and which ones threw rocks at beggars instead. Learned to move quickly, quietly, invisibly. Learned that when you were nothing, you had to be small to survive. Today was market day, and the square was packed. Bodies pressed against bodies. Voices shouted over voices. The smell of fresh bread and roasting meat filled the air, making Ivy's empty stomach cramp with longing. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. She pressed herself against the wall of a bakery, trying to stay out of the way. If she was lucky, the baker might toss out the burned loaves at midday. If she was unlucky, one of the guards would notice her and chase her off with a kick and a curse. That was her life, luck and unluck, nothing in between. The crowd shifted suddenly, a ripple of movement and murmured excitement. Ivy pressed harder against the wall, making herself smaller. Something was happening. Something important. The king. The Lycan king is coming. The words spread through the square like wildfire. People scrambled to line the streets, pushing and shoving for a better view. Guards appeared, forming a corridor through the crowd. The air itself seemed to change, heavier, charged with something that made the hair on Ivy's arms stand up. She should run, should disappear down one of the side streets before the guards spotted her and decided a street rat didn't belong anywhere near royalty. But curiosity held her in place. She had never seen the Lycan king, had only heard stories, whispers of a man who had lived for centuries, who could shift into a wolf the size of a horse, who had conquered half the realm with nothing but his claws and his will. The procession appeared at the end of the street. Horses, guards in gleaming armor, banners snapping in the wind. And at the center, walking on foot like he had nothing to fear in the world, was the king. He was enormous. That was her first thought. Tall and broad, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders and a face that looked carved from stone. He moved like a predator, smooth, purposeful, aware of everything around him. Even from a distance, she could feel the power radiating off him like heat from a fire. The crowd pressed forward, eager for a glimpse. Ivy was shoved sideways, then backward, then... Her foot caught on a broken cobblestone. She went down hard. Her palms scraped against the street. Her knee cracked against stone. Pain shot through her, sharp and bright, and she gasped, curling in on herself. "Get up," she thought frantically. "Get up, get up, get up." But before she could move, someone stepped on her hand. She cried out. The man didn't even look down, just kept walking, his boot grinding her fingers into the cobblestones. Then another person stepped over her. And another. She was in the middle of the street, in the path of the crowd, and no one stopped. No one cared. They just kept walking, stepping over her, stepping on her, like she was debris, like she was nothing. Because she was nothing. Tears burned in her eyes. She tried to push herself up, but her hand screamed with pain and her arms gave out. She collapsed back to the cobblestones, trembling, waiting for the next boot to find her. Stop! The word cut through the noise like a blade. The crowd went silent. The footsteps stopped. Ivy looked up. The Lycan king stood 3 feet away, his entire procession halted behind him. His eyes, gold, burning gold, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the stones. "Your Majesty," one of the guards said nervously, "it's just a beggar. We can have her removed." I said, "Stop." The king's voice was quiet, but it carried. "Everyone, stop." He moved. One moment he was standing there. The next he was kneeling in the middle of the street, right in front of her. Kneeling. The Lycan king, on his knees in the dirt, looking at her like she was the only person in the world. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Ivy couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at this impossible man who had stopped his entire procession for her. "Your hand," his voice gentled. "Let me see." She didn't move, couldn't move. He reached out slowly, carefully, and took her injured hand in his. His touch was warm, gentle, impossibly gentle for hands that could tear a man apart. He examined her fingers, her scraped palm, the bruise already forming where the boot had ground her into the stone. Something flickered across his face, something that looked like rage. Who stepped on her? The question was quiet, deadly. The crowd shifted nervously. No one answered. I asked a question. The king looked up, and his golden eyes swept over the assembled people. Who stepped on this girl and kept walking? Silence. Terrified. Absolute silence. The king turned back to her. The rage faded, replaced by something softer, something that made her chest ache. "Can you stand?" he asked. Her voice cracked. "I don't know." "Then I'll carry you." Before she could protest, before she could say anything at all, his arms slid beneath her. He lifted her like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest as he rose to his feet. The crowd gasped. The guards stared. The entire square watched as the Lycan king, the most powerful man in the realm, held a street beggar in his arms like she was something precious. "Your Majesty," one of his advisors sputtered, "you can't. She's just a—" "She is my mate." The words rang through the square like a death knell. "And if anyone ever steps over her again, I will rip their legs off and feed them to my wolves." Ivy's head spun. Mate. He had called her his mate. That wasn't possible. That wasn't— "What's your name?" he asked, looking down at her. "Ivy," she whispered. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, relief, a bone-deep certainty that made her heart stutter. "Ivy," he repeated, like he was tasting it. "I'm going to take you somewhere safe now, somewhere no one will ever step over you again." She should protest, should tell him there had been a mistake, that she was no one, nothing, a street rat who didn't deserve to be held by a king. But his arms were strong, and his chest was warm, and for the first time in her entire life, someone had stopped for her. So she closed her eyes, pressed her face against his shoulder, and let herself be carried. She didn't know where he was taking her, but anywhere was better than the cobblestones. The palace was a dream. That was the only explanation. Ivy had fallen asleep in an alleyway, starving and cold, and now she was dreaming, because there was no world in which a street rat woke up in a bed softer than clouds, in a room larger than any building she had ever slept in, with servants hovering at the edges, asking if she needed anything. "This isn't real," she whispered. "It's real." The king's voice came from the doorway. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed, watching her with those burning golden eyes. "How do you feel?" Ivy looked down at herself. Someone had bathed her while she slept. She was clean, actually clean, for the first time in years. Her injured hand was wrapped in soft bandages. She wore a nightgown made of fabric so fine she was afraid to touch it. "I don't understand," she said. "What don't you understand?" Everything. She didn't understand any of this. Why he had stopped. Why he had carried her. Why he had called her his mate in front of the entire city. "I'm no one," she said. The words came out flat, certain, the truest thing she knew about herself. "I'm a beggar. I sleep in alleyways and eat scraps from the garbage. People step on me because I'm not worth going around." Her voice cracked. "Why would you want me?" The king crossed the room. He moved slowly, carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. When he reached the bed, he didn't sit, just knelt beside it, putting himself at her eye level. "What's my name?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. "What?" "My name. Do you know it?" She shook her head. She knew he was the Lycan king. She knew he was powerful and ancient and terrifying, but she had never learned his name. People like her didn't need to know the names of kings. "Kale," he said. "My name is Kale, and I've been alive for 372 years. Ivy stared at him. 372 years. It was incomprehensible. She was 19. She had lived less than a fraction of his life. "In all that time," he continued, "I never found my mate, my true mate, the one my wolf was meant to bond with. I searched. For decades, for centuries, I searched. And I started to believe she didn't exist." His golden eyes held hers. "Then I walked through that market square and saw you fall, and my wolf went insane." "Because I fell?" "Because you were hurt. Because people stepped over you like you were nothing. Because you were lying in the street, bleeding, and no one stopped." His jaw tightened. "My wolf wanted to kill every single one of them. It took everything I had to stay in control." Ivy's chest felt tight. "But I am nothing. You're my mate." He said it simply, certainly, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You're the other half of my soul. I've been waiting for you for over 3 centuries. His hand reached out, hovering near her face but not touching. "You are the furthest thing from nothing I have ever encountered." She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process any of this. 24 hours ago, she had been curled in a doorway, trying to ignore the gnawing ache in her stomach. Now a king was kneeling beside her bed, telling her she was his destiny. "I don't know how to be a mate," she whispered. "I don't know how to be anything except what I am." "Then learn." His voice was gentle. "I'm not asking you to change overnight. I'm not asking you to become someone you're not. I just want you to stay. To let me take care of you. To give this a chance. And if I can't, if I'm too—" She gestured at herself. "Too broken, too damaged, too much of a street rat to ever be anything else. Then we figure it out together." His hand finally made contact, brushing a strand of hair back from her face. The touch was feather-light, reverent. "I've waited 300 years for you, Ivy. I can wait a little longer for you to believe you're worth waiting for." Her eyes burned. She blinked rapidly, refusing to cry. She hadn't cried in years. Crying was a luxury for people who had someone to comfort them. "You must be hungry," Kyle said, rising to his feet. "When did you last eat?" "2 days ago. Maybe 3. Something flickered across his face. That rage again. Banked, but burning. "That ends now." He walked to the door and spoke to someone outside. A moment later, servants appeared with trays, more food than Ivy had ever seen in one place. Roasted meat, fresh bread, fruits she didn't recognize, cheese and pastries, and things she couldn't even name. "Eat," Cale said, settling into a chair beside her bed. "As much as you want. As slowly as you need." She reached for the bread first. Her hands were shaking. The first bite was so good it almost hurt, warm and soft and real in a way that made her want to weep. "Slowly," Cale reminded her. "Your stomach won't be used to this much food. Take your time." She ate, piece by piece, bite by bite, while the Lycan king watched her with those golden eyes. Not impatient, not demanding, just present. "Tell me about yourself," he said after a while. "There's nothing to tell." "I don't believe that." He leaned back in his chair. "Everyone has a story. What's yours?" Ivy looked down at the bread in her hands. "My parents died when I was 6. Fever. After that, there was no one. No family, no money, no anywhere to go." She shrugged, a jerky, defensive motion. "So I lived on the streets, begged, stole sometimes when I had to, did whatever I needed to survive. For 13 years. For 13 years. She took another bite of bread, chewing slowly. "You learn things, living like that. Which alleys are safe, which merchants are kind. How to make yourself small enough that people don't notice you." She laughed bitterly. "I got good at being invisible, at being nothing. It was safer that way." "Safer than what?" The question cut deeper than she expected. She thought about the men who had tried to grab her in dark alleys, the women who had kicked her for begging too close to their stalls, the guards who had beaten her for existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Safer than being seen," she said quietly. Kyle was silent for a long moment. When she risked a glance at him, his expression was unreadable. "You'll never have to be invisible again," he said. "Not here. Not with me." She wanted to believe him. Wanted it so badly her chest ached with it. But 13 years on the streets had taught her that wanting was dangerous. That hope was a trap. That the moment you let yourself believe things could get better, the world would crush you all over again. "Get some rest," Cale said, rising from his chair. "I'll be back in a few hours. If you need anything, anything at all, just ask." He paused at the doorway, looking back at her. "You're safe now, Ivy. I know you don't believe it yet, but I'm going to prove it to you. Every day. For as long as it takes." Then he was gone, and she was alone in a room fit for a queen, surrounded by more food than she had seen in a year. She ate until her stomach ached. Then she curled up in the impossibly soft bed and closed her eyes. For the first time in 13 years, she slept without fear. And somewhere deep inside, in a place she had thought was dead, something stirred. Hope. The days that followed were the strangest of Ivy's life. She had spent 13 years learning to survive, learning to scrounge for food, to find shelter in doorways and under bridges, to make herself small and invisible and forgettable. Now she had a room with a bed she could sink into, servants who brought her meals on silver trays, clothes made of fabric so soft they felt like water against her skin. It should have been paradise, Instead, it felt like drowning. She couldn't sleep in the bed. It was too soft, too big, too exposed. The first night, she had woken in a panic, convinced someone was coming for her, and had ended up curled in the corner with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The second night was the same. By the third night, she had stopped trying. She couldn't eat at the table. The dining hall was too large, too open, too full of people who looked at her with curiosity or contempt. She took her meals in her room instead, eating quickly, furtively, the way she always had. She couldn't stop flinching. Every sudden movement, every loud noise, every unexpected touch sent her heart racing and her body tensing for a blow that never came. 13 years on the streets didn't disappear in a week. The palace was beautiful, but she didn't know how to live in it, didn't know how to be anything other than what she had always been. A street rat, a survivor, a nothing. Kyle noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything. "You're not sleeping," he said one evening, finding her in the library. She had discovered it 3 days ago. A quiet room full of books, with corners she could tuck herself into and walls at her back. It felt safer than anywhere else in the palace. "I'm fine," she said automatically. "Liar." The word was gentle, almost fond. He settled into a chair across from her, his golden eyes tracking over her face. "Tell me what's wrong." "Nothing's wrong. Everything is—" She gestured vaguely. "Perfect. Beautiful. Overwhelming. I just don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Any of it." Her voice cracked. "I don't know how to sleep in a bed that big. I don't know how to eat at a table with other people watching. I don't know how to walk through halls without pressing myself against the walls." She pulled her knees to her chest, making herself small. "I keep waiting for someone to realize I don't belong here and throw me back out on the street." Kyle was quiet for a long moment. Then he rose from his chair and crossed to where she sat. He didn't sit beside her, just lowered himself to the floor, his back against the bookshelf, putting himself at her level. "When I was young," he said, "I was captured by an enemy kingdom. They kept me in a cell for 2 years. No light, no space, just stone walls and darkness." Ivy stared at him. She hadn't expected that. Hadn't expected the Lycan king to have known imprisonment, suffering, helplessness. "When I finally escaped," he continued, "I couldn't sleep in a bed for a decade. The openness terrified me. I kept expecting the walls to close in, the darkness to return." His eyes found hers. It took time. It took patience. And it took someone who understood that healing doesn't happen overnight. "How did you get through it?" "I learned to be gentle with myself, to accept that some days would be harder than others, to celebrate the small victories instead of punishing myself for the setbacks." He reached out, his hand hovering near hers. "You've survived 13 years on the streets, Ivy. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to be proud of." Her throat tightened. "I don't feel proud. I feel broken." "You're not broken." His fingers brushed hers, feather-light. "You're adapting. There's a difference." She didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever treated her struggles as something natural, something understandable, something that didn't make her less. "Can I tell you something?" she whispered. "Anything." The words rose up before she could stop them. Words she had never spoken aloud. Words she had buried so deep she had almost forgotten they existed. "Sometimes, on the streets, I thought about giving up." Her voice was barely audible. "When it was cold and I was hungry, and no one would even look at me, I thought about just lying down and not getting up again, about letting the cold take me. Tears burned in her eyes. I thought it would be easier than fighting, easier than hoping. Cale's hand closed around hers, warm, steady, an anchor in a storm. But you didn't, he said quietly. No. She shook her head. I don't know why. I just kept going, even when it hurt, even when it seemed pointless. I kept going. Because you're a survivor. He shifted closer, his free hand rising to cup her face. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. You're the strongest person I've ever met, Ivy. You've faced things that would have destroyed anyone else, and you're still here, still fighting, still hoping, even when hope costs you everything. I don't feel strong. Strength isn't about feeling strong. His forehead pressed against hers, so close she could feel his breath on her lips. It's about getting up when everything in you wants to stay down. It's about surviving when survival seems impossible. It's about being here, right now, letting yourself be vulnerable with someone who wants to help. His voice dropped to a murmur. You are extraordinary, Ivy, and I will spend every day proving that to you until you believe it yourself. Her breath caught. He was so close. Close enough that if she tilted her chin up, their lips would meet. Close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his golden eyes, the slight tremble in his jaw, the way he was holding himself back. Cale, she breathed. I want to kiss you. His voice was rough, strained. But only if you want it to. Only if you're ready. She should say no, should pull back, protect herself. Remember that wanting things only led to pain. But his hand was warm on her face, and his eyes were soft, and she was so tired of being afraid. Yes, she whispered. He kissed her. It was gentle, careful, a question more than a demand. His lips brushed hers like she was something precious, something fragile, something worth cherishing. And when she gasped against his mouth, he swallowed the sound and kissed her deeper. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Ivy, he murmured, his forehead still pressed to hers. I know. She pressed her hand to his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her palm. I know it's too fast. I know I'm not. You're everything. He cut her off gently. You're everything, and we'll go as slow as you need. I'm not going anywhere. She nodded. Her lips were tingling. Her head was spinning. And somewhere deep inside, in the place that had stirred with hope, something else was waking up. Trust. Fragile, terrifying trust. She was falling for him, falling out of survival mode and into something softer, something warmer, something that felt dangerously like love. And for the first time, she didn't want to run. 3 weeks of healing, 3 weeks of learning, 3 weeks of slowly, carefully, letting herself believe that this might be real. Ivy still couldn't sleep in the bed most nights, still flinched at sudden noises, still caught herself pressing against walls, making herself small, disappearing into corners out of habit. But she was getting better, smiling more, eating at the table sometimes when it was just her and Cale, walking through the palace with her head up instead of down. She was starting to feel like maybe, possibly, she could belong here. Which was, of course, when the court decided to remind her that she didn't. The council meeting was Kyle's idea. He wanted to introduce her formally, to present her as his future queen. She had been terrified, but he had held her hand and promised to be right beside her the entire time. He hadn't counted on Lady Vance. "This is absurd." The noblewoman's voice cut through the council chamber like a blade. She was tall, elegant, with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. "You expect us to accept a street beggar as our queen?" The room went silent. Ivy felt the words like a physical blow, slamming into her chest and stealing her breath. "Lady Vance." Cale's voice was dangerously calm. "I would advise you to choose your next words very carefully." "I mean, no disrespect to you, Your Majesty." Lady Vance's smile was thin, cruel. "But surely you can see the problem. This girl has no breeding, no education, no understanding of court politics or noble etiquette." Her eyes swept over Ivy with undisguised contempt. "She was begging in the streets 3 weeks ago. She probably still has lice." Laughter rippled through the chamber. Quiet, stifled, but there. Ivy's face burned. Her hands trembled at her sides. "She is my mate," Cale growled. "That is all that matters." "Is it?" Lady Vance raised an eyebrow. "Mate bonds can be rejected, Your Majesty. We all know this. Perhaps it would be better for everyone if you found someone more suitable." The word hung in the air. Suitable. As if Ivy was a piece of furniture that didn't match the decor. As if she was a stain that needed to be scrubbed away. She had heard words like this her whole life. Worthless. Nothing. Trash. She had learned to let them roll off her, to make herself small and invisible until the cruelty passed. But she wasn't invisible anymore. She was standing in a room full of people who were looking at her, judging her, finding her wanting, and there was nowhere to hide. "Perhaps," Lady Vance continued, her voice dripping with false concern, "the girl herself would prefer to leave. Surely she must feel out of place here. Surely she must know she doesn't belong." Every eye in the room turned to Ivy. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The walls were closing in, the air was too thick, and all she wanted was to run, to flee back to the streets, where at least she knew the rules, where at least she understood her place. Then she felt Cale's hand brush hers. Just a touch. Just a reminder. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." She thought about the cobblestones, about lying in the street while people stepped over her, stepped on her, like she was debris. She thought about the cold and the hunger and the endless, grinding loneliness of being nothing. Then she thought about Cale, about the way he had knelt in the dirt for her, the way he had carried her like she was precious, the way he looked at her like she was worth something, worth everything. She had spent her whole life being stepped over, being dismissed, being told she was nothing. She was done. "No," she said. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. Lady Vance blinked. "I'm sorry?" "No." Ivy stepped forward, and something shifted in her chest. Something that felt like fire. "I'm not leaving. I'm not going back to the streets. And I'm not going to stand here and let you make me feel like I don't deserve to exist." The room went utterly silent. "You're right," Ivy continued. "I don't have breeding. I don't have education. I don't know which fork to use at dinner, or how to curtsy properly, or any of the things that apparently matter to people like you." She met Lady Vance's eyes, and she didn't look away. "But I know how to survive. I know how to fight. I know how to get back up when the whole world is trying to keep me down. And I know—" Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. "I know that I am worth more than the dirt you think I came from." Lady Vance's face had gone pale. The laughter had died completely. "Your Majesty," the noblewoman started, turning to Cale. She's not finished. Cale's voice was quiet, proud. His eyes were fixed on Ivy with an intensity that made her heart race. Ivy took a breath. I didn't ask to be the king's mate. I didn't ask for any of this. But I'm here now, and I'm not going to let anyone, not you, not this council, not anyone, make me feel like I don't belong. She lifted her chin. I choose to stay. I choose him. And if you have a problem with that, you can step over me like everyone else has my whole life. But I won't stay down anymore. Silence. Then Kyle moved. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, pulled her into his arms, and kissed her. It wasn't gentle this time. It wasn't careful. It was fierce and possessive and consuming, a claim made in front of every noble in the room. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, and she grabbed his shirt and held on because the world was spinning and he was the only solid thing in it. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. Mine, he growled against her lips. You're mine, Ivy. Say it. Yours. The word came out breathless. Certain. I'm yours. I choose you. I'll always choose you. He turned to face the council, his arm wrapped around her waist, holding her against his side. His eyes swept over the assembled nobles, and the temperature in the room dropped. Does anyone else have concerns about my mate? He asked quietly. No one spoke. Lady Vance had gone white as snow. Good. Cale's smile was sharp, dangerous. Then let me be clear. This woman is my mate, my queen, my equal in all things. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects me, and anyone who tries to drive her away will answer for it with their lives. His arm tightened around Ivy. Are we understood? Nods, murmured agreements. No one dared meet his eyes. This council is dismissed. The nobles fled. Ivy watched them go, her heart still pounding, her hands still shaking. But she was smiling. Really smiling. For maybe the first time in her life. You were magnificent, Kyle murmured, turning her to face him. I was terrified. Those aren't mutually exclusive. He cupped her face in his hands. I'm so proud of you, Ivy. So incredibly proud. I love you, she said. The words surprised her. She hadn't planned to say them. But they were true. Truer than anything she had ever said. Kyle's expression cracked open. Something raw and bright and overwhelming shone in his eyes. I love you too, he said roughly. I've loved you since the moment I saw you fall. I'll love you until the end of time and beyond. She kissed him again, soft and sure, and let herself believe it. The girl everyone had stepped over had finally stood up, and she was never going back down. The wedding was held in the market square. Kale had offered her the palace gardens, the grand cathedral, any venue in the kingdom she wanted. But Ivy had asked for this, the cobblestones where she had fallen, the street where everyone had stepped over her, the place where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. She wanted them to see. The square was transformed. Flowers draped from every window. Ribbons fluttered in the breeze. Thousands of people lined the streets, nobles and commoners alike, all of them watching as the street rat who had begged for scraps walked toward the Lycan king in a gown of white and gold. Ivy held her head high. Her hands didn't shake. Her eyes didn't drop. She was done being small. Kyle waited for her at the altar they had built over the exact spot where she had fallen. He was dressed in black and gold, his dark hair loose around his shoulders, his golden eyes burning with something that made her heart ache. Pride, love, awe. All for her. I, Kyle, king of the Lycan territories, take you as my mate, he said, his voice carrying across the silent square. My partner, my equal, my queen. He took her hands in his. I vow to lift you up when the world tries to push you down. I vow to see you when others look away. I vow to love you, all of you, every part of you, for as long as I draw breath and beyond. Ivy's eyes burned with tears, happy tears, tears she had never thought she would cry. I, Ivy, she said, and her voice rang clear and strong, take you as my mate, my partner, my equal, my king. She squeezed his hands. I vow to stand beside you. I vow to never hide again. I vow to love you with everything I am, the girl who survived and the woman she's becoming, for as long as I live, and longer still. Kyle pulled her close and kissed her, and the square erupted in cheers. Somewhere in the crowd, Ivy caught a glimpse of familiar faces. The merchants who had thrown rocks at her, the guards who had chased her from doorways, the fine ladies who had wrinkled their noses and called her trash. They were all watching now, all seeing her, not as a street rat, not as a beggar, but as a queen. Let them look, she thought. Let them all look. That night, in their chambers, Cale was reverent. He touched her like she was sacred, kissed her like she was precious, whispered her name against her skin like it was a prayer he had been waiting his whole life to speak. I used to dream about being warm, she murmured afterward, curled against his chest. On the coldest nights, when I thought I might not survive until morning, I would dream about being warm and safe and wanted. She lifted her head to look at him. I never imagined it could actually happen. It's real. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. This is real. I'm real. And I'm never letting you go. She kissed him again, soft and slow, and let herself believe it. The vindication came gradually, then all at once. Lady Vance was the first to fall. Within a month of the wedding, evidence surfaced of her embezzling from the crown. Funds that should have gone to the poor, to the shelters, to the people who lived on the streets the way Ivy once had. Kyle stripped her of her title and her lands. The last anyone heard, she was living in a boarding house in the lower district, scrubbing floors to pay her rent. Ivy didn't gloat, didn't even smile when she heard the news. But there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the woman who had called her trash was now learning what it felt like to be overlooked. The others followed. One by one, the nobles who had laughed at her, who had whispered behind her back, who had suggested she be sent back to the streets. They found themselves on the outside. Not through any revenge Ivy sought, but simply through the natural consequence of opposing a queen who had the king's complete devotion. And Ivy? Ivy thrived. She established programs for the street children of every city in the territory. Shelters where they could sleep safely. Kitchens where they could eat their fill. Schools where they could learn to read and write and dream of futures beyond survival. She walked through the streets herself, sometimes, remembering what it had felt like to be invisible, and making sure no one else had to feel that way again. She became known as the queen who remembered, the one who had risen from the cobblestones, the living proof that worth wasn't determined by birth or blood or breeding, but by the strength to keep getting up when the world kept pushing you down. 5 years passed, then 10. Ivy stood on the balcony of the palace, watching the sun set over the city that had once been her prison and was now her home. Below, in the square where she had fallen, children played, fed, clothed, safe, because she had made it so. arms wrapped around her from behind. Kyle pressed a kiss to her hair, pulling her back against his chest. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured. "The cobblestones." She leaned into his warmth. "I used to lie awake at night, staring at the stars, wondering if anyone would ever stop for me, if anyone would ever think I was worth stopping for. And now—" She turned in his arms, looping her hands behind his neck. "Now I know. I was always worth stopping for. I just needed someone to show me." "You showed yourself." His forehead pressed against hers. "I just gave you the space to see it." She kissed him, long and deep, and when she pulled back, she was smiling. "I love you," she said. "I love you more than I ever thought I was capable of loving anything." "I love you too." His voice was rough with emotion. "My mate, my queen, my everything." Ivy thought about the girl she had been, the street rat curled in doorways, invisible and forgotten, waiting for scraps that never came. The nothing who had learned to make herself small just to survive. The broken thing who had lain in the street while the whole world stepped over her. That girl was gone now. In her place was a woman, a queen, someone who had been stepped on and stepped over, who had been ignored and dismissed and treated like debris, and who had risen anyway. Not because someone had lifted her up, but because she had finally learned that she deserved to stand. Cale had stopped the world for her, had knelt in the dirt and carried her in his arms and shown her what it felt like to be seen. But she had done the rest herself. She had learned to stop hiding, learned to take up space, learned to believe that she was worth something, worth everything. The girl everyone stepped over had become a queen, and she would never, ever fall again. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new tale of fated mates and found love. More Lycan King romances are coming soon.